I thought about Samson, and I thought about his calling in God. I thought about his purpose that God had set down in front of him. And so each one of the men and women of God that he called for a specific purpose. And they weren't all the same. Some were evangelists, and some were pastors, and some were, I think it was Dorcas that sewed the clothing. Am I right in that? And then I'm not for sure what Tabitha. I know Tabitha was a house preacher, like a pastor, but everything that God called them to do, everybody else didn't have that same calling. For instance, when Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt land, why, that wasn't the same calling that maybe Ezekiel had, or maybe that, Joshua had, or whatever, Carl. That wasn't the very same thing. Because he's called us for different purposes and different reasons. But when I was thinking about Samson, and this is going to be really short, it's not going to be real lengthy, but I was thinking about Samson and his calling, and I thought about the calling that he had was the strength. Physical strength was a calling that he had. But along with spiritual strength, physical strength, there was a spiritual strength that was also called. And I thought about what God told his mother. He said, a razor is to never touch his head, and not strong drink is to touch his lips. And he's going to be called a Nazarite from the birth. And so I thought when she probably was told that, how she probably really studied before he was born what a Nazarite did. And I'm sure if there were things, Julie, that a Nazarite mother that's getting ready to have a baby did or did not do, things that she did or did not eat, things that she was required, I'm sure she did or did not those things that she had studied upon. Because I believe that she was determined to raise the type of a child and him to become the type of man that God had called him to be. After all, she had waited for this child, and she wanted this child. And I believe that she was determined that he would be the type of child that he had, that he was purposed to be. I thought about probably when he was young. Emily, I thought about when he was probably 8 or 9 years old. And I know that his calling was a physical strength, but I wondered if he was able to outrun all the other kids, the strength that he would have. And Carl, can you just imagine when they all got lined up to do their races? They're like, Lord, Samson's here. I ain't a racing. I'm not going to race. Samson's here. Or when they were going to go out and hunt, they're like, well, we know that, Samson's going to get all the whatever, the deer or whatever it is that they were hunting for. Because they all had that acknowledgement, and they had that evidence that he was a strong young boy. And he was going to be strong when he grew up. He was going to be a strong young man. But in all of that, there was something that got a hold of Samson. And when that something that got a hold of him, I believe it was pure ego that got a hold of him. Just like I believe it was ego that got a hold of Saul. And what I thought about today when I was praying and I was talking to God, Claudette, was the fact that Samson began to trust his own strength. That was his downfall. He began to trust in his own ways and his own strength. And I thought, God, how are we, if we're not careful, so easily led away by the enemy, by our own ego, and by our own whatever we think highly of ourselves, for example. Some ladies, girls, as they grow up, they become great housekeepers. I wasn't called to do that. Some girls were called to be great cooks. I used to be able to cook, but it seems like no more. I can't really cook that well anymore. I make all kinds of mistakes anymore. And some were called, young ladies were called maybe to be people that go out hunting. There's some ladies that like that. Some people like sports. Some girls were called to, do sports, a certain sport, or to walk in that world. But they've all been called to do something, and whatever it was called to do in the physical, there was a spiritual that went with that, Carl. See, Samson was called to be physically strong, but he was also called to be spiritually strong. See how that works? He had to be like a Nazarite. No strong drink to his lips, no haircuts. He had to be spiritually strong. But we read in the Word of God, Missy, how that Samson failed again and again and again because he trusted in his own strength. Maybe in the very beginning he didn't. Maybe in the very beginning he depended on God to be his strength and to help him when the Philistines or, some of the other enemies of the land would get a hold of him, that he would trust in God and he would know that it was God's hand. But as time went on, I'm sure that when he picked up the jawbone of that ass and he killed, what was it? Was it 2,000 or 10,000? 1,000? See, I was saying it's more than that. Men with just that bone that he picked it up. 1,000, yeah. When he picked that up, well, he was like a whirlwind, no doubt. He probably looked like a buzzsaw, as my daddy would say. He probably looked like something that was just, he was, plowing them down, knocking them down like they were bowling balls. He knew the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. And I believe that when things like that happened in his life, he became bolder and bolder in his own strength. Because in the end, when he was being deceived by Delilah, and he must have loved that woman. But when he was being deceived by Delilah again and again, every time that he deceived her, and he told her something that his strength was in, and he was lying to her. But every time he came back, and after she cried and she whined, and she's like, "You don't love me, and you don't, you have not told me your secret yet." And every time he was becoming more and more underneath her spell. And when he did that, as he could become underneath her spell over and over again, he was getting closer and closer to the truth. He started out far from the truth. If they bind me with 7 cords, it's never been used. They do this. But pretty soon he started talking about his hair. Yeah. He was getting closer and closer, trying to satisfy. I believe he was trying to keep one foot in the world and 1 foot in God. And he was getting that, but he was getting closer and closer to telling his secret of his power that God called him to use, the covenant of God. So then, as he got closer and closer, and one of the things he said, and it was right before when he told her the truth, and she had his hair cut off. How in God's name she bound to gave him a sedative? He laid there and let somebody cut his hair and not know it. She bound to gave him some type of a drug. But anyway, as he lay there, and when he got up, he said, "I'll do as I did before. I'll do as I did before." He never said, "God will come to me again and I'll do this in the power of God." If my reading is correct, he's like, "I'll get up and I'll do like I did before. Like I did when they bound my hair in the loom. When I carried the gates out on my back. All those things, I'll just do that again." But this time, there was a great difference. And this time, when he depended on his own strength, There was no strength there for him to be able to defeat the enemy. There comes a time, thank you for putting that up there for me, baby. He says, I will be at other times and shake myself. He was dependent on himself. But I think that if we're not careful, I have seen so many people fall in the spirit because they have added confidence and they've taken confidence in themselves for the things that God has done. And they have said within themselves, I'll shake myself. I'll do like I done before. God's had mercy first time. He's had mercy second time. He's had mercy third time. He's had mercy, and this will be no different. I'll stand up and I will shake myself. And I will do like I did before. But I believe, Brother David, there comes a time when we completely break covenant with God. And I believe that God stands back. I don't believe God got any pleasure out of that. I don't believe that God got any pleasure when the Philistines put his eyes out and blinded him. I don't believe that when he looked down upon Samson and he saw him standing at the grist mill and he was going around and around, he was grinding their corn for them. I don't think that he was a bit happy about that. He was a bit pleased with that. It didn't bring him any joy whatsoever. What he saw was a broken man and a broken covenant. And Brother David, we as Christians have to be careful that the things that God does in our lives, that we don't attribute them to our own strength or our own wisdom. You know, Solomon was just as bad. He became wise. God gave him wisdom, but I think he began to, trust in his own wisdom. I believe people bragged on him so much that it just kind of went to his head. And he thought the wisdom of God was his wisdom. If there's one thing I've asked God for is to give me a discerning spirit. From the time I got saved and I was 15 years old, I prayed earnestly for discernment. I told the Lord, and this has been my prayer for, I've been saved for in February, be 51 years. And I have said this prayer over and over and over in all my 50 years that I served God, and it's this: don't let me be deceived, and don't let me deceive myself. It's worse to deceive yourself than to have somebody deceive you. If someone deceives you, that's bad and that's hard, and that's a terrible thing to be, but they're responsible for that. But if we deceive ourselves into thinking we're more than what we are, to think that God loves us enough, that we're, He's always shown mercy to us, and we've got to get out and do our little things and do our little sins, and we've got to touch the fire some, and God still come to us on Sunday and blessed us, and He still come to us on Wednesday, and when we prayed for things that God has stepped in and moved for those things for us, and we're still able to touch those little things out there, the fire. And then we begin to think that God's not going to punish us at all. I have known people like that. I've seen young people like that. And they would touch that God told them not to bother, to stay away from. And they've touched it, and they've touched it, and they've allowed their purpose in God to be broken. And they think God is still going to He loves me enough. He's still going to do what He said He would do. He'll still help me out of this. He'll get me out of this problem that I'm in. But I think there comes a time that God's, I don't know if you would call it His patience, His grace, His mercy, that He kind of steps back a little bit. And He lets you go on. And before you know it, you're blinded and you're standing at the grist mill of Satan. And you're grinding corn for everybody else to enjoy. So today, that's what my mind was upon. I prayed and I said, God, surely do not allow me to think more highly than I am. God, let me be humble of heart and humble of spirit. if my talent, and I don't even know if I have it, I don't have a talent to sing. My family got that. I don't have that. And even everybody that got married into my family seemed like they have it too, but I just don't have that. But if that's not my talent, and if my talent were to be able to cook, and I don't know if that would be a talent that you would have as far as physically, Carl, maybe if that was my talent, and I don't even know that it is, but maybe then I would be able to cook for others spiritually. I believe there's a connection between what you're physically called to do and what you're spiritually called to do. Maybe if my calling is to preach and preach the word, then maybe my calling is to talk to people one-on-one and encourage them, to be an encourager. I mean, I don't know. You know, God's never come down that I can remember and say, this is your talent. This is what I've called you to do. But I do know there's purpose for my life. And it's hard for me to say that because, you know, I don't want to puff myself up. But we've all got purpose in our life. And so God always has a purpose for us. And so whatever my purpose is, I want to be able to accomplish it physically and spiritually. If it's to feed you all, I want to be able to feed you all. If it's to give you all desserts, I want to be able to spiritually give you desserts in the spirit. I want to do what God has called me to do, not only in this natural life, but in the physical life and the spiritual life together. Some people, Carl, God has called to be mothers. And I thought about, you know, Aunt Colleen, you know, your mom, my mother, different ones. Probably your all's mother was called to be a mother. And so they're also considered mothers in the spirit. That when people are hurt, they can go to them and they can receive healing in their spiritual life as well as their natural life. But God's got a calling for all of us. I can't tell you what your calling is because that's between you and God. But let's make sure that when we figure out, God tells us, we figure out what our calling is, that we never let it go to our head, as we would say, and let us think more highly of ourselves than what we should. Because as soon as we do, Satan will come, and he will absolutely knock us down. And we'll have to carry, as my mama said, carry a whooping. Your mother tell you had to carry a whooping? Yeah, my mama said that before. Your mom ever told you had to carry a whooping? Yeah. You got to pack a whooping. Mama called it carrying a whooping. You got to carry a whooping. So let's make sure that we don't do that. But today, as I was praying, like I said, Brother Sampson came to my heart. And I call him Brother Sampson because even though I know he messed up terribly bad, he was still my brother. He was still called by God with a purpose. And people can say, oh, he made it, he didn't make it, he, you know, flubbed up so bad that, you know, I'm not so quick to say that. Because God is able to forgive anything but blaspheming. He's able to forgive. So that was what I had in mind. Carl, you want to add anything to that? Anybody else want to add anything to that? Missy? Sister Lori, you want to add anything to that? She's got her head down there so low I can't never see her. She could never be there. I mean, she could be there all service and I wouldn't know it. Or be gone and I wouldn't know it. She could slip out the back door, and unless I seen her slip out, I would never know she went back there. But let's make sure that we don't carry a whooping. And we don't think that we're more highly than what we are. But if God has called you for a purpose in the spiritual realm, do it. Do it. See, if Samson had stayed spiritually close to God and didn't have to go after the Delilahs of this world. His mother asked him once, she said, why can't you be satisfied with the daughters of Israel? Why do you have to go after those of a false god? Why do you have to go after the strangers? Why do you have to go after our enemy? Why can't you be satisfied with the women of Israel? There's plenty of women here. Pick you out one. And stay out of the enemy's patch. But some people can't. I don't want to be that way, but some people, they cannot. They have to look and see what's there. But let's try our best to stay out of the devil's patch and make sure that we know what our purpose is and that we accomplish what it is that God's called us to do. And like I said, it usually aligns up with your physical and spiritual. They usually line up together. All right. I'm finished, girls. You got a testimony? Anybody?